Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Stats Files, a companion podcast to the Demonland podcast. Each week, Demonland's own Binman breaks down the numbers that matter most from the D's game, whether it's a win, loss, or draw. It's a long-form deep dive into the stats behind the results, the numbers that help explain both the brilliant wins and the disappointing losses. I'll be away for the next few weeks, so Binman will hold down the fort across the coming matches, bringing you a hybrid of the main Demonland podcast and the Stats Files as he dissects the games against the Suns, Bombers and Lions. So without further ado, here's Binman with his breakdown of the stats behind Melbourne's incredible come-from-behind win over the Blues, along with a preview of the upcoming clash against the ladder-leading Suns. Take it away, Binman.
G'day to all Demon fanatics out there. This is the third Stats File pod for 2026, the standalone Stat Files pod, part of the Demonland universe. The Japanese Council for Continuous Quality Improvement contacted me with a cease and desist letter to stop using the phrase Kaizen, which is the Japanese word for continuous improvement, on the back of my last podcast blowing out to a touch over an hour after having said that I want to bring it in at half an hour. Well, my response was that I've embraced agile project planning and got lost in the numbers last week and realised I was going over, but perhaps not quite that much. Agile project planning, and so I'm not even going to set a time limit for this one, because then I'm not going to either not meet it or blow it out. So it'll be what it'll be. Let's get into it. D's versus Blues. What a fantastic win. As I talked about last week, the structure of the show is why we won or lost. Equity points I'll talk to, but this week those two will be combined because that's why we won, I think, and why the Blues lost. Touch on the three phases of football: defense, offense, and contest. And I might just do a little quick review of the upcoming game against the Suns, which is really exciting, though I haven't done a deep dive, but what I have done, there's some really interesting numbers for that game. All right, without further ado, let's jump into it. Why we won or lost. Anyone who got through to the end of last week's marathon Stats File pod will know that at the end, I predicted that we would win. I was that I was really confident that we'd win. I predicted a 4-goal plus win, and so I was pretty close to that mark. I said that the game would come down to us negating their strengths, namely their ball winning capacity, the contest clearances, their ability to win post clearances, and how well we could mitigate them, and how well we could maximise our strengths around how well we use the ball, points from disposal, shots at goals, carrying the ball. I think that's how it panned out. I think that's exactly what happened. We did a great job of negating their strengths, their ball winning ability, apart from that first quarter. Just to remember, ball use, you get ball winning measures the points added to a team's expected score from the act of winning a possession in dispute. For example, hard ball gets, loose ball gets, and intercepts, etc. We almost matched them in that. AFL average is 110.9 for equity points from winning the footy. We were almost on that 110.7. They were above it, 111.3, but only a 0.6 differential between the two teams. That would have thrilled the coaching panel, because I think that went a long way to us winning the game. Particularly remarkable because their domination in the first quarter, they smashed us for ball winning in that first quarter, smashed us for territory, but in this context, smashed us for ball winning in the contest and clearances, stoppages, around the ball, post clearance, contested possession, all those numbers, they really dominated. So for the rest of the last three quarters, we really dominated that match. And I think that's an important point, because so much focus in the media has been on how poorly they played and what did they do to lose the game. Very little focus has been on what did we do to win the game. and we won the game, I think, because we matched them for ball winning ability and actually hurt them. They got more contested possessions than us, more post clearance contested possessions, but we were more impactful with how we used the footy or what we did once we won it, and so hence the equity points, 110.7 to 111. The key one, though, was we really, really took advantage of our comparative advantage over them, which is our ball use and how we use the ball. We scored 67.5 across our 23 players, equity points, the player rating points for ball use to their 41. That's a smashing, plus 26.6 points for ball use. Remembering ball use, the player ratings, and these are elements of the player ratings, they measure impact, scoreboard impact specifically, and so it was a really formidable performance with how we used the ball, and I think it was really the difference between the two teams. Just a sort of a context for how well we use the ball, the AFL average this season is 49.9 equity points for each team, with 67.5 for ball use. That really shows how impactful we were, and again, particularly in the last three quarters, because our ball use was just abhorrent in the first quarter. It was an absolute disaster in that first quarter with how we used the ball, how often we turned it over, and that's how you lose points. You lose points for when you turn it over, the opposition scores. So there were a number of those, obviously, in that first quarter. So hugely impressive. Our last three quarters were remarkable. So short version, we won because we negated their ball winning strengths. And as I said on the show last week, number one for a contested footy up until that ran, I think, still. And we really took advantage of our comparative advantage in ball use, smashed him in that department, in fact. I think the other big factor in the win, as I also noted on the pod last week, is don't get sucked into the idea that footy is going to be becoming an outside game, that pressure is less sort of important. As the season goes on, come finals, back third, pressure will be king, and it was king in this game, just as it always has been, really. Remarkable performance from that perspective. Just a reminder, pressure points are the weighed sum of pressure acts, physical pressure acts like tackling, for instance, and bumping. They're worth 3.75 points. Closing acts like chasing are worth 2.25. Chasing acts are 1.5. Closing acts are 2.25. Corralling is 1.2 points. We had 185 pressure points in that first quarter to the 169 plus 16, which really showed that our intensity was right up from the very beginning of this game, and that was noted by King in multiple presses, post-match presser, where he said really the issue last week in our first quarter was that he didn't say this, but we didn't come to play, is how I sort of interpreted his comments. We came to play in this game, but our skills let us down. Our fumbles, exactly as he said in his presser today. Actually, we fumbled the ball, we missed targets, our handballing was poor, and I think that was a big factor. For obviously why we played so poorly in that first quarter. So our ball use was terrible, but our pressure and intensity was terrific. 185 to 169 plus 16, 183 in the second quarter, and they slightly improved to 177. Third quarter, we really came out halfway through, or 20-minute marker. I noted on the coverage that it was 238 pressure points at about the 15-minute mark of the third quarter. Ended up being 209 for that quarter, which is huge. Remembering 200 is considered elite. They 187, they were 22 pressure points. I think their fitness is a real issue for them, and or their running power and their athletic profile, as King said today in his press conference. He talked about in the context of the Suns' athletic profile. You're hearing this more and more, things like athletic profile, running power, those sorts of things fell away for them. Their pressure was 171 in the last quarter. Ours was 202. I can't recall, did I say 200 is considered elite, 180 AFL average. So plus 31 pressure points for that match, for that quarter, the last quarter. And for the match, we were plus 19. Fantastic performance. I talked about this on the pod, so I won't go on in the main pod, so I won't go into detail, but our top five pressure players were Jack Steele, Cade Chandler, Tom Sparrow, Cozzy Pickett, and Harry Sharp, and also Caleb Windsor and Christian Salem were 6 and 7. Also, I think that one of the factors, and it sort of fits into using the ball and how we transition and that strength of ours, our strength this year. A bit of a quick note about our running power. I noted that against the Saints, Langdon had the most kilometres. He ran 15.9 clicks for the game. We ran 298 games in that game. 298 kilometres is a long way. That dropped down to 286 against Freo. Langdon again had the most kilometres, but down to 15.3. We had so 12 kilometres less than we did against the Saints, but 5 kilometres less than Freo, who ran 291 kilometres in that game. Against the Blues, Langdon again had the most kilometres for us, 15.8 clicks for this game, so back up to nearly what he ran in the Saints. We ran 290, so we had 4 more clicks than last week and 2 more than the Blues, who ran 288. It was notable that our quickest player in attack, which is defined by when we have the footy, not in the forward 50, was Paddy Cross, who averaged 9.1 kilometres an hour per hour, kilometres per hour, just ahead of Latrell at 9 kilometres per hour, and defence. And the defence is when the opposition has the ball. His average speed in defence, Paddy Cross's, was 9 kilometres per hour, and I would argue that's probably a big reason why he came into the team as for his genuine leg speed. As I noted last week, they're sort of rubbery figures, but I think it's an example of points a little bit to our running power. I went to a function the week before this game, where King spoke, and he said that in fact, Guerra, who interviewed him, said that in the interview process King was asked about our list profile and what his assessment of it was, and the response was that he couldn't say that until he saw the full suite of GPS numbers, how far people are running, at what speed they're running, basically the athletic profile of the team. I thought that was really fascinating, actually, in terms of an insight into King's sort of psychology and how he thinks about the game and what game plan he's trying to implement, which, as I've banged on about, is really about, is underpinned by incredible running power. The other relevant bit of that that he talked about in that function was all team defense has been part of footy for a long time, but he believes in all team offense as well, and that he really wants the defenders to get involved in scoring chains and score themselves. And to do that, he wants all team sort of running in one sort of, I forget what words he used, but in my mind I sort of extrapolated like an amoeba who goes up and down the ground, and that's partly the reason why they need such good runners and such a strong athletic profile. But it also points to the danger is if that defensive line is pushing up the ground as the ball moves up the ground, if it gets out the back of that, we need to get back hard on defence. In order to do that, you need players who not only are fit enough to run for the entire game, but that have got the right athletic profile to be able to get back on D when the ball is turned over. And get forward, conversely, get forward when we create a turnover, to get forward and create opportunities ahead of the ball. So the second part of the show equity points, I've touched on that already, so no need to do that. We'll jump into the 3 phases of footy. Talked about it last week. I'm going to put defence first, and I'm glad I did, because for me, defence is, attacking's great. It's really exciting to watch, but defence is really critical to the game. You don't win flags unless you're top 4 in defence. Obviously, defence is when the opponent has the ball. Some notable defensive stats: Carlton dominated inside 50s, 22-5 in the first quarter. They were able to cash in late, obviously, in that last quarter. They kicked 4-1, 25 points from the last 9 entries of their term, which really would have frustrated the coaching team. They took 8 marks inside 50 for the quarter. They really, they were smashing us in that first quarter. It's most marks inside 50 since round 15, 2021. In that quarter, this season, the Blues have kicked 50% of their score so far this season from forward half chains, which is really crazy. The highest percentage of any side in the AFL. And in the first quarter, they had 12 forward half intercepts in that quarter, which is just really off the charts. At the 20-minute mark of the first quarter, their entire score, the Blues' entire score at that point, 4-1-25, had come from forward half chains, with 3 of those 4 goals coming via stoppage. So it was a really good example of what I meant by their ball winning. They smashed us for ball winning, and we couldn't get our ball use and our running and our transition game going at all, in large part because of our fumbles, turnovers, and poor skills, but also because they won the territory through their sort of stoppage and contest and post-clearance domination, meaning that we were often trying to transition the ball from really deep in our D50. Logic suggests you've got to go through more people, and that's going to increase the likelihood you're going to turn the ball over, which is exactly what happened, really. As the game went on and we got the ball movement going and their fatigue sort of settled in a bit, and their athletic profile I don't think is as good as ours, although it's improved from last year. I think they couldn't go with us, which created the space ahead of the ball and also helped us reduce some of our turnovers, I think, because there's more space. So some of the key numbers around defence is we had 70 intercepts to their 66. I reckon the defensive unit should really have a huge pat on the back. They could have blown us away in that first quarter. They had a really strong first 10 minutes. The Blues, they scored the first goal from memory. They didn't take the chances, and I think, but the defence I thought were really terrific. After being a bit fumbly the week before in that first quarter, they really saved our bacon a number of times and were terrific all game. I thought 70 intercepts was terrific. AFL average this season is 67.7, so above that. Bang on the same for intercept marks. The big one that was tackles really showed the intensity. We had 82 tackles for the game. They had 54. Plus 28 is enormous. Again, AFL average gives you a good guide of how impressive 82 tackles in a game is on a day that the weather was perfect for footy, so it wasn't wet and there wasn't heaps of stoppages in that sense. So 54.9 tackles per game is the AFL average, and we had 82, I think, from memory. Steele had 9 of them, maybe even more. So a huge performance that showed that, my prediction, as I said at the end of last week's standalone pod, was I had a feeling that they were really tuned up for this game and had set themselves, and, Maxie's 250th home at the G. And I think that proved to be right, to be honest. So, I think that's reflected in the intensity they brought. 82 tackles is enormous. We had 10 tackles inside 50. As well. In terms of the attacking midfield was really interesting number in terms of the territory. In that first quarter, as I said, they dominated. So it was 69% they had time in forward half. We were only 31%. And to me, that really told the tale. They really took advantage of their strength. We couldn't get it out of our back D. We, partly through our errors, but also how deep it was. And fair to them, they were really terrific at the pressure they applied and their ability to trap it in their forward half. So in the first quarter, it was 31 forward for us and 69 for them, time in forward half. By the end of the match, that had swung 52 our way, 48 their way. So 52% of the time the ball was in our forward half by the end of the match. And it went 59, 53, 54% in quarters 2, 3 and 4. And again, that told the tale. So the very next quarter 2, even though we didn't put the score on the board, we dominated. I'd argue we dominated the game for the last 3 quarters, fully dominated it. So, that it was frustrating to have all the focus in the media on what Blues did wrong, not nearly enough focus on what we did right, one of which was completely took the territory dominance they had in the first quarter and flipped it almost literally. So, as I said, the first quarter they had 69% of the time of the ball in their forward half. It was only 41% for them in that second quarter, and we were 59% of the time in forward half in the second quarter, and maintained that pattern for the rest of the match. That was a really big factor in the win. Moving on to contests. So contest is obviously when the contest phase is when neither team has clear possession. The ball's in dispute. Obviously, it happens most frequently at stoppages, like centre bounces, throw-ins and ball-ups, etc., or when the ball is loose on the ground. So some really noticeable first quarter contest stats. Carlton outscored, in particular first quarter, Carlton outscored us 5 goals, zip to 30 points to 0 from stoppages. So another quarter where we had nothing on the back of last week's appalling sort of centre clearance number where we scored a point, I think, or didn't score any. Can't recall. I don't think we scored even a single point from centre centre clearances, some from stoppages, but not from centre clearances. They scored us 5 goals zip in that first quarter, so 30 points from stoppages. They led clearances in that first quarter 9-6, and Cripps was going bananas, had 5 clearances in that quarter alone. Again, that really points to their sort of relative strength in ball winning. But across the game, some other notable contest stats. At the 20-minute mark of the second quarter, Carlton led the contested possession count by 9 in that quarter and by 17 for the match. So even at that point, in the second quarter, even after we had sort of, the pendulum had swung back towards us and we've got the game on our terms a little bit, they were still well and truly up by, with contested possessions 9-17 in total. So, again, pointing back to their ball winning, they were really, leaning into, their strengths, their ball winning, and they were right in the match at that point, though I think that we were getting on top. In first halves this season, the Blues have won the contested possession count by an average of 20 per game, so bang on that. But in second halves, they've lost that by an average of 6 per game. I would say that points to fitness. I'm amazed. Well, not amazed actually, because it happens every year, but really all of the talk about why they lost, I've hardly heard a single commentator or analyst say because they're not fit enough. I would argue that's it. That's the key reason. I mean, no reason why you wouldn't be able to keep competing, and if that's your style of game, and dominate in second halves. But 20, averaging being up by 20 per game at halftime, and then down by 6 in the second half. That points to me fitness, and also again that athletic profile, not just fitness, but just Paddy Cripps is a good example. He's probably super fit, but he's not a runner or a natural athletic runner like, for instance, Sharp is. So it sort of makes sense that he's not going to be as good at running out games as someone like Sharp. In the third quarter, we had 9 more tackles than them. Our pressure was elite. It was 209 to 187 in that quarter. We really started sort of winning the territory, winning the physical battle, and evening up that ball equity, the ball winning equity points to, as I noted, where we almost were on parity by the game's end. Just the contest, a couple of really interesting stats jumped out at me. As I noted, the post-clearance contested possessions were 78, but 74 to 82. So we were down by 8 post clearance. Again, we were down huge after the first quarter, so we really improved in the last 3 quarters, yet. With 8 fewer post-clearance contested possessions, also had 10 fewer post-clearance ground ball gets, so 54 to 64. Despite that, we had 125.1 post-clearance equity points to their 112. So we were plus 12 for post-clearance equity points, which measure the impact of those winning those clearances. How effectively did we put those post-clearance wins on the scoreboard effectively, and it just shows that even though they had more post-clearance contested possessions, they had more post-clearance ground ball gets, 10 of them and 8 of the contested possessions. We were much more impactful with our post-clearance contest work in terms of scoreboard impact, and I think that was really noticeable. Clearances, as I said, we really evened up and took away their one wood. So for the game, total clearances, we won 40, they won 38. Average AFL average at the moment is 35.5. So above AFL average for total clearances, which was really impressive given, all the talk was about how good they are at clearances. Stoppage clearances, we hit 29 to 27. Centre clearances were bang on 11 each. And so, we actually did pretty well for winning clearances again. Sort of, if you take out the first quarter, those numbers is a shellacking for them. So really impressive. First possession to clearance percentages were almost both the same, 63% of the time when we won the clearance. First clearance that we got the first possession, and 62.5 for them. So almost the same. centre bounce attendances. Interestingly, excluding our rucks, we had 9 players with centre bounce attendances against the Saints and 11 against Freo. I made that point last week. This week was a bit different. We only had 6 players with centre bounce outside our rucks, Maxi, Roo and Pets. We only had 6 players with centre bounce attendance this week, which I thought was fascinating and definitely a tactical shift because, as I said, 9 against the Saints and 11 against Freo. So our non-rucking players who had centre bounce attendances were Jack Steele had 25, the most of any player in our team. Cozzy Pickett had 23 at this function that I heard Kingy speak at. He flagged that Cozzy would be playing more minutes in the midfield, and that's what happened. Tommy Sparrow had 21, his best game for the Melbourne Footy Club, I reckon. Caleb Windsor had 13. The huge points to how they're going to be using him. That's high. Jay Cully had 3, and Colton Tolstrup had 2 centre bounce attendances. So I thought that was a really interesting change from previous weeks. And perhaps it was to do with having more of Jack Steele in there and more of Tommy Sparrow in there to combat their physical, how good they are. And if that's the case, it was certainly effective. Crazy number here. There were 113. We had 113 ruck contests. The AFL average is 87.8. So it's a lot of ruck contests. So it really surprised me actually, that number. This was a big one. Hitouts. Total hit out 68 to 26. Maxi had collectively, but mainly Maxi had 42 more hit outs, which is really quite remarkable. AFL average is 34.6, so we had 68. Maxi, probably got 95% of them. Really, I think that was huge because that allowed us to control territory in the second, third, and fourth quarters, and it was a big factor in the win. Hit outs to advantage. 18 of those 68 went to advantage, only 10 for them. That may not sound sort of statistically significant, but it is, particularly in terms of, ability to score from them, but also get territory. So 18 hit-outs to advantage. AFL average is 10.2, so that gives you a sense of, how dominant Maxi really was, both in the raw number of hit-outs he got and the hit-outs to advantage, which was 18 to 10. Really, really impressive. Moving on to offense. Obviously, offense is controlling the footy. The offense phase occurs when a team has a clear possession of the ball. The primary objectives are to maintain possession, transition the ball towards the attacking goal, and create scoring opportunities. Obviously, the key actions are effective kicking and handballs, players leading up, being able to spread the field to stretch opposing defence. But again, King is a straight line coach. At this function, he said that you won't see Melbourne doing many dinky kicks around the back half, which I thought was interesting because we saw quite a few of them from Carlton. He's not a big fan of lateral kicks in the on the half-back flank. Of course, when you have to do them, you have to do them. But he wants to stretch the field forward. So very much a territory by foot and by hand team, and that's his sort of philosophy. Some notable offensive stat at the 20-minute mark of the second quarter, we'd had 7 inside 50s in a row for that quarter, but it only scored 4 points from that territorial advantage. So we were on top. We just couldn't put it on the scoreboard. There were some frustrating misses and missed opportunities in that stage, but you could really feel it. And I didn't go to the game, unfortunately. I wish I did, but I wonder whether people watching live could feel that sort of shift in the game. By the end of the second quarter, we had 12 of the last 13 inside 50s. Fortunately, we only scored 1 goal. 5 from the term. We were dominating, but really not putting it on the scoreboard. And it's interesting because the expected score, which I'll speak to in a sec, actually again our score was above the expected score. So it really improved in the second half. We really got rolling in the third quarter. That's where we set up the win. That was, the winning quarter, premiership quarter for us. And we were super impressive. After 12 minutes of that third quarter, we led clearances 5-1. We kicked 3 goals from 3 goals straight. 18 points from just 5 entries to start the term, and by the end of the term had 10 more inside 50s. That's the game right there. Fantastic third quarter, as I mentioned. Our pressure was bananas in that quarter as well, plus 22 pressure points for that quarter. We won the game in the third quarter. In that quarter, our kicking efficiency really improved as well. We had our kicking efficiency of 71% in the third quarter, while the Blues went at just a horrible 36%. That's what it looked like watching. No doubt in large part, that was due to the pressure we applied. It was off the charts. Our pressure and intensity and attack was first class, but they have, their fair share of ball butchers, and 36% by foot is pretty bloody poor, and we were 71%. So love that. Like normally in the last 5-6 years, if you're talking about poor kicking efficiency in a match, you're talking about Melbourne, and not in this instance, which is really, really, I think, a positive for us. At the 25-minute mark of the third quarter, we'd scored 5 goals straight from 11 inside 50s. So, almost 50% of the time we went inside, we scored a goal. And conversely, the Blues could only manage 2 goals from their 8 entries at that point of the match. All of our 6 goals in the third quarter were launched from between the 2 arcs, which was really fascinating. And I think that sort of speaks to the way King wants to play, where that back line really presses up and the forward line. So it's actually, there's a lot of players, almost all of our players he wants within, he didn't say, I'm not sure, but maybe a 50, 40 metre radius of where the footy is, and moving like one sort of unit up and down the ground. I think that's why so many of our goals are scored between the arcs in the midfield area. 4 of the third quarter goals came via intercepts, the other 2 from stoppages. In the third quarter, Cos was just nuts. 6 disposals, 5 contested possessions, 4 clearances, and 4 score involvements. Windsor had a huge quarter as well. That sort of got lost in the wash up a little bit. He had 400 plus metres gained. He was really influential. Bailey Fritsch had a fantastic third quarter, found himself on the end of chains, 4 score involvements in that quarter, 2 goals from his 4 disposals in the third quarter. And in that quarter, we really got our forward handball game going. And that's something that's a really noticeable part of the way King's got us playing. I really enjoy it, but it was massive. We had 157 metres gained by hand, by handballs in that quarter. They only had 21 metres, and so that's off the charts numbers. Just 157 is a lot. The top, I think, is Suns at 441 metres gained by hand, which is unbelievable, really. So we're averaging, I think, 240 or 50 metres gained. So we come up against a side who are using on the weekend, who are using long handballs, and handballs a hell of a lot. They're also the highest handballing side in the AFL. We are a low disposal side, so we will always have low kick numbers and we'll always have low handball numbers, but we've got high metres gained by hand and relatively high by foot as well. Like they did in the second quarter, in the third quarter we dominated territory in that third term. Difference was our efficiency so like we did in the second quarter, I should say, we dominated territory again in the third term. The difference was we were much more efficient putting that territorial dominance on the scoreboard. Second quarter, we kicked 1 goal 5-11 from our 21 inside 50 entries. In the third quarter, we kicked 6 goals 2-38 from less inside, from 19 inside 50s in that quarter. Much more efficient. I think we got our game going. We got that forward movement. But geez, at the end of the day, accurate kicking is probably the most underrated stat in footy. It decides so many games, and did in this game. We were just dominant, but we put that dominance on the scoreboard in that third quarter. In the last quarter, before Harry Mackay scored the point from his rush set shot, we had 13, and might have ended up being 14, because maybe his was outside. We had 14 inside 50s in a row in that last quarter, which really, for me, reflected how much on top we were of that game, and how their lack of run, how much run we had, and how little run they had, and I think that's sort of evidenced again by their collapse in their the differential of 30 odd in that last quarter for pressure. In that last quarter, sort of evidencing that same dominance and them falling away, keeping in mind that clearances and stoppages are their one wood. We led the clearances in the last quarter by 9, so we gave them a shellacking for clearances, for stoppages, for territory, for time in forward half, for how we use the ball, how we transition the ball. We just smashed them in every department. We took their 1 wood away and used that to club them around the head a little bit, and they couldn't even come close to mitigating our 1 wood. Cos was amazing in that last quarter, had a huge third quarter, but amazing in the last. 10 disposals, 4 score involvements and a goal in that last quarter. What a game. Best game he's played for the Melbourne Footy Club, I reckon. Kicking efficiency was 62 to 0.1 to 61 across the game. So just sort of to get some context on that, AFL average for kicking efficiency is 67.2. Interestingly, metres gained total 5,742. Just a little bit less than them, 5,760. They had metres gained, but keeping in mind they dominated like that first quarter. So, we really got that back on our terms for the last 3 quarters. AFL average for metres gained is 5,681 this season so far. So we were above AFL average with 5,742. But metres gained per kick is 26.8. So because we have left disposal, which is actually almost the same as our average last year, which was 26.2. The big one, handball metres gained, and I saw David King talked about on First Crack handball metres gained. He's a couple of weeks behind me on that front, but it's, as he noted and as I've noted, it's increasingly become a key metric for particular teams who are using that for. Not everyone is. Lions don't do it, for instance. Saints don't do it. Or Blues, they're not really contenders. But Suns and a lot of other contenders, Freo, some of the better teams use metres gained. For those long forward handballs is a really notable element of their game. For this match, we had our season high metres gained by hand, 376 metres gained from handballs. 74 more than them, 302. They're actually sort of trying to implement that too. I just don't think they've got the athletic profile to effectively do it, but I was actually really surprised that they had as many metres gained by hand as 302, way more than I would have guessed coming into it. So that sort of indicates that whilst they are a stoppage and clearance team, that they are trying to implement this new game method that other teams are doing, this sort of move it quickly forward by hand and run in waves. So perhaps that's overplayed a little bit, that they're stuck in the past, just in the same way that there still remains a bunch of myths about how Goodwin's game plan in the last couple of years, and particularly his last season. AFL average, so metres gained 376 by hand. AFL average is 227. We averaged 169 last year, so almost more than twice as many in this game as our average last season. So the AFL average is 227. We're slightly above that. We're about sort of, I think, 8th or 9th on the table for metres gained for handball. Suns, who we played this week, are number 1 by a country mile, 440 metres gained, and I think Freo were second. So we had 61 inside 50s to their 51. AFL average for inside 50s 54. Again, that points to the territory game that King is trying to play, which again, without belabouring a point, one of the ironies is that's a very similar philosophy to Goodwin's philosophy in that 21 to 23 phase, when get it forward. That was more about trapping in there and having that defensive wall set up and making it difficult for the opposition to bring it up the ground. But nonetheless, inside 50s, we, by way of example, putting this, also sort of speaking to Goodwin's change methodology last year, we had 64 inside 50s in this game on a beautiful day for footy. We were averaging 52.8 last year as a team. The AFL average is 54. Transition scoring. So there was nothing really notable in that. Our forward, we won most of those transition sort of indicators. Chain to scoring percentage, we were up. Defensive 50 to forward 50%, we were slightly up to 23.3% to 19.6. Defensive 50 to score percentage, we're up, but only a little bit, 4.7 to 4.3. Defensive half to forward, half percentage, 31. So really similar on those, which was a little bit surprising. Partly that, I guess that might have been to do with the game was very much a territory game. Expected score, as I noted, again, our score was above the expected score. That's 3 weeks in a row, and so was theirs, and that's also 3 weeks in a row. All Saints, Freo, now Carlton have all scored more than their expected score. The expected score for us was 84.3. We scored 100. Their expected score was 69.9. They scored 77. So neither team can complain about missed opportunities. That was pretty impressive. Our score sources, we scored 12 from centre bounces. They scored 16. We scored 38 from around the ground stoppages. They scored 23. Sorry, what am I saying? They scored 44. We scored 38. From centre bounces, we had 12. They had 16. We didn't get any from kick-ins this season. We're averaging 10. We had 3 goals last week from our kick-ins, none this game. Turnover points was massive. It's probably arguable, if you're going to pick one stat out and say, well, this, in terms of that conversation about what's a symptom, you'd maybe point to this one, symptom and cause. But we had 50 points from turnover. We're averaging 53.7. They could only manage 17 points from turnover. Our 3 opponents so far are averaging 49. So that was a critical number. We smashed them on turnover. What did we win by? 23 points. Well, we're up by 33 points for turnover. For me, that speaks to the pressure that we applied, but it also meant that we hurt them when we won the ball, which and scored on turnover. They didn't, which might explain the differential in the post-clearance equity points. The sort of, they had more post-clearance ground ball gets, more post-clearance contested possessions, yet we had more post-clearance equity points. That's probably, scoring on turnover, winning those balls and then scoring probably helps explain that. Interestingly, one of the fascinating things about this game, and it goes to the point that I made before about the scoring between the arcs. In this game, of our points, 51 of them started, so over 50% of our total score of 100 began in the attacking midfield between the two arcs. So our season average is 35, way up on that. They scored only 26 points from the attacking midfield. Opponents have averaged 27 points, 27.3 points for that for us this year. So although that was really interesting, attacking midfield, it really showed where they started, like 50, it was 2 points from our defensive 50, which is nothing compared to what we've been doing, 7 for them. And I think that speaks to, it was a territory when they were up, they had it squashed down their end and vice versa. 13 from defensive midfield, 12 from centre bounces, and 51 points, as I say, from attacking midfield. Also, from our forward 50, there was our next category. We had 22 of our points were scored, began in the chain, began in the forward 50. This was nuts. Points from defensive half is widely used as a measure for how well teams transition the ball from the back half. But we only scored 15 points from our defensive half. They only scored 15 points from the defensive half. We're averaging 37 this season, so way under half of our season average from the defensive half, and we're conceding 38. So it probably speaks again to the territory, but we weren't moving the ball deep from our D50, and again it points to that sort of dominance of the midfield, attacking midfield zone, and really sort of, I think that was partly coaching and partly structure and system, but that's a really notable stat. So finally, we'll just to wrap it up. Look, I won't go into too much detail about the Suns game. It's a really interesting game, I think. Some of the numbers, they're number one for most handballs. They're a really high handballing game. Number one for most meters gained. I mentioned that before, 440 plus. One of the things that surprised me looking at the numbers is they're actually mid-table for clearances and points from stoppages, and actually around us, we're about the same. So that might be, I guess, to do with Rao not being in the side so far, and Humphrey being out of the team, and losing, Petrarca halfway through a game, him not playing this week. So, it's early. It's only 3 games in. What's notable about that is Wits they've had the most hit-outs of any team in the AFL, and Wits is a big reason why. I think the battle between Maxi and Wits will be a big factor in this game. He struggles, well, not struggles, he doesn't struggle against any opponents, I don't think, but the players he has most difficulty beating, let's put it that way, I think are players who are really physically strong, and Witts certainly is that. He likes to get into a wrestle with Max and is strong enough to win a lot of those physical wrestles that the umpires seem to love to let go. An exciting game. Look, they're favourites. They're just looking at the betting odds. 3.17 favourites have come in. We're 3.17 to win this match, which come in from $3.37 in the last 24 hours, which is interesting. $1.36. That's about right. And they're a top 4 side, no doubt about it. Rao just got announced that Rao's coming back in. I hope that changes, because without Rao, Humphrey and Petrarca, it really mitigates that sort of strength that they have a little bit like Carlton, which is, it's probably not sort of indicated by the numbers. But, certainly they're a quality team. They've got quality players across the line. Their athletic profile, they're really fit as well. If you were going to have a bet in this game, I'd be looking at the total match points, because it seems like, just from sort of reading between the lines, the benchmark number that King's looking for is per game is 100 points. Now they're the highest scoring team. No one scored more points than the Suns. Funnily enough, the team that scored the most goals, though, is North Melbourne. But the Suns have scored the most points so far. The high-scoring team, we're playing to play high. The total match points 183 or something, 187 perhaps. I suspect this will be a high-scoring game. The importance of the win against Carlton is similar to the importance of the win against the Saints. It's really a mulligan. It's, as long as we play well and don't get blown off the park, which I really don't think we will, this is a good opportunity to benchmark ourselves against a genuine top 4 team in the same way it was against Freo. I thought we played great in the last 3 quarters against Freo, but and we brought that form. Well, we brought that form not into the first quarter against the Blues, but for the rest of the game. Obviously, it goes without saying we can't afford to give the Suns a 4, 5, 6 goal start like we did with Freo and Blues. That can't happen. So I'm hoping that will be intense right from the get-go. Just with that, I would say that we didn't start well. Our intensity was fine, but I do wonder whether that sort of open running game plan, its sort of least effectiveness is probably always likely to be in that first quarter, because the opposition isn't fatigued. The opposition's sort of strength can win at the contest and run with us. But, as the game goes on and we've got a fit team with a really exciting athletic profile, that advantage, I think, becomes greater as the game goes on. But nonetheless, we can't afford to let them get away. Really, really looking forward to this game, having not been able to get to Sunday's game. Hope a bunch of people turn up. The weather's going to be 24, 25, light winds. Perfect day for a game of footy. Let's get along. Let's support the Ds. And fingers crossed, let's get another win. Either way, win or lose, I'll unpack it next week with a deep dive statistical. Look forward to the game and look forward to next week's main Demonland podcast. That's it for today.
That was Binman Stats Files. A big thank you to Binman for putting that together for all of us stats nerds. If you enjoyed what you heard, do us and Binman a favour by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate the support. And if you do leave a review and a comment, we'll give you a shout out and read it out on the show. As mentioned earlier, I'll be away for the next few matches, so Binman will be in the driver's seat, bringing you a blend of the 2 shows. A big thank you to Binman for stepping in and taking that on. See you in a couple of weeks. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.
It's a grand old flag. It's a high-flying flag. It's an emblem for me and for you. Well, it's the emblem of the team we love. The team of the red and the blue. Well, every heart beats true for the red and the blue. As we sing a song for you. the team played fine in the year 39. We're the team that no one can lick. And you'll find us there after the final bell with the spirit of 1926. Well, every heart beats true for the red and the blue as we finish sing this song to you. Should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eyes